everyone. We are really, really thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jade Wu. She is a behavioral sleep medicine specialist. She's also a researcher here at Duke University. Her current research focuses on treating sleep disorders and in those with chronic illness. You also might know her from pop culture. She is the current host of The Savvy Psychologist, which is an awesome psychology podcast in the Quick and Dirty Tips Network. It basically is like 10-minute episodes giving you evidence-based tips about all sorts of questions related to psychology. So I would definitely recommend any of you to check that out. You also may have seen her on TV. She's been a guest on NPR and ABC, and her work is in New York Times, Post, Psychology Today. So basically, she's a super awesome guest, and we are so happy to have her. So now we'll get on to the interview, and I'll stop bragging.
All right, guys, today we have a very special guest, and she's going to be talking to us about something that we might not often think about in relation to mental health, but it's actually crucially important. It's also something I happen to be really bad at, so I'm really glad that we have her here to help us do this better. So the topic is sleep, and our guest is Dr. Jade Wu. So Jade, tell us about sleep, about how you got into this, about why this fascinates you.
So I actually got introduced to sleep as a science very early on in my life. My father worked for the Chinese equivalent of NASA, the space program in China, and he actually worked with astronauts, specifically researching sleep in spaceflight and how sleep would be different, circadian rhythms could be different in space. So I remember being like a 5-year-old accompanying him to the sleep lab, talking to the astronauts. So it was pretty cool. And I never thought I would actually go into that, but every career decision I made kind of got me closer. And now I research sleep for a living.
What fascinates you about it?
I think sleep is one of the greatest frontiers in neuroscience research. And we spend a quarter to a third of our lives doing it, or at least trying to do it. And we know so little about it. I mean, we still don't really know why we sleep. We know that if we don't sleep, that's not good and, bad things happen. But we don't know exactly how it works and we don't know exactly why. We just know that sleep is crucially important, as you said, for our mental health, our physical health, our general social and personal well-being in every way. And so I'm fascinated by it because of its scientific mysteriousness, but also because, it is a pretty good place to intervene when we have mental illness, physical illness. Improving sleep tends to raise the water for all boats. And I've never really seen, or let me re-say that, I've never seen someone improve their sleep and not improve at least a few other aspects of their lives. So it's pretty cool.
It is amazing to think that we spend, I guess, a quarter of our lives in an incredibly vulnerable position, like that evolution would allow us to be, belly up, unaware of the world around us, predators all around.
Exactly.
So I guess that shows us how important it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you think about it, if you live to be 100 years old, which I hope you do, you will have spent about 30 years continuously sleeping in this belly up, vulnerable position of being unconscious, but also your brain is doing some amazing things and vastly important things. So yeah, that really speaks to how important sleep is.
It's cool. And also, when I think about times that I've had sleep problems or other people, it's almost like this mysterious thing that affects everything, but a lot of people feel so out of control of it. Like if you are not sleeping well, feels like a battle, right? Or feels like something like that people try to get better, but they just struggle with it until magically they start to sleep better. So I'm really excited to hear, at least if we don't know a lot, I'm excited to hear at least what we do know.
Sure. Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head there. It's so tricky with sleep because it's not one of those things where you can just work harder and get better at. I think a lot of us are taught to problem solve and fix and manage and get on top of things. And if only we worked harder, put more effort into it, we would do better. And that's sometimes the case with other health behaviors like losing weight, quitting smoking, at least to some extent. But with sleep, not so much. You can't really just work harder at sleep and get better at it. Sometimes, because sleep problems are also very diverse. If someone came into my clinic and said, "Oh, I have such trouble sleeping," I would want to ask at least a couple dozen questions to figure out, before I would give advice about it, because there are so many different types of sleep problems where the conventional wisdom about sleep may help them or may backfire and make things worse. So that's the tricky thing, where there's no universal list of good sleep practices necessarily that I can just tell everybody and improve their sleep. And that's the fascinating but also pesky thing about sleep disorders.
What are some of the common sleep problems?
Yeah, so probably the most common thing I see is insomnia, and that really just means trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, and it's bothersome. It makes you feel cranky or fatigued or just not 100% during the day. And the interesting about insomnia is that we often think of it as sleep deprivation or not getting enough sleep. But actually, you can imagine insufficient sleep and insomnia being circles in a Venn diagram with a little bit of overlap, but not a lot. And this seems very counterintuitive, but if you think about it this way, if you were sleep deprived, you'll be very sleepy, right? Because just like if you didn't eat food, you'll be hungry, right? So if you're sleep deprived, you're going to be sleepy. And if you're sleepy, you're not going to have insomnia. So often people are saying, oh, I'm so sleep deprived. This is like torture, like they do to prisoners of war, that I can't sleep. But, prisoners of war, they would fall asleep if only their environment allowed them to. But for people with insomnia, they usually have great sleep hygiene. They usually have plenty of opportunity to sleep, but something internally is keeping them up.
What are usually the reasons why someone, I'm not sure there's a law, but what are the common things that keep people up?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty complicated question, because there are as many triggers for acute insomnia as there are people with acute insomnia. Like any number of things can kind of trigger insomnia in the first place. Could be a stressful semester, losing a job, getting a new job, divorce, whatever it may be. Even exciting things like on the night before your wedding, you may not sleep very well. So these are the things that kick off like an acute bout of insomnia a night or two or maybe a couple weeks in the first place. But then there are different things that keep insomnia going and make it chronic. If you had to guess, how long do you think people have had insomnia for by the time they come to the clinic to see me?
10 years.
Yeah,
I would say years. Yeah,
like 10 to 15 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so by that point, they've had insomnia for such a long time. And at that point, it's not because of the divorce anymore. It's not because of that new job. Because people do find their baseline after a stressor like that. But the perpetuating factors of insomnia are like the logs that you keep adding to the fire that keeps the fire going. If you don't add those logs, or if you take those logs out, insomnia runs out of fuel and burns itself out, because our bodies really do want to sleep. Sleep is such a fundamental, basic biological process that our bodies really do want to do it. We just have to get out of the way. Mm-hmm. So the job of a sleep therapist, when they are doing cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI for short, is to identify what these perpetuating factors are for someone's chronic insomnia and help that person to change those behaviors, change those ways of thinking about sleep and relating to sleep, to help them improve their relationship with sleep so that they can get back to baseline, or back to a state of being in harmony with their sleep instead of working against it.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine people listening or like, oh, I've been tired for the past 10 years. Do I have it? Or, oh, I need coffee all the time to stay awake. How do people know when they have insomnia versus like just modern society doesn't let us sleep that much, or like have a baby, right? Like how do we know? Do you know, like, okay, you have the diagnosis of insomnia?
That's a great question. And I think maybe two big things. One is that insomnia is really about how much you struggle to fall asleep, or how much you struggle to fall back to sleep once you wake up during the night. Everybody wakes up during the night, but people with insomnia, once they wake up, they toss and turn, and they have busy brain, their mind doesn't shut off, they keep tossing and turning for a while. or at the beginning of the night, they have trouble falling asleep in the first place. So that's really the hallmark of insomnia. Somebody else might also feel cranky and tired and draggy during the day, but they might hit the pillow and fall asleep right away. So that's, a different issue. That might be burnout or sleep apnea or depression, anxiety, something else. Whereas someone with insomnia really struggles at night. And also, one major red flag, I would say, is if you are dreading sleep, if you feel like sleep is a battle, if you really don't feel like sleep is your friend, but rather an enemy or at best a frenemy, you wish you could hang out with them, but they just won't hang out with you. And you're like alternately really jealous and really mad but desperately want to hang out. Like that kind of relationship, that really spells insomnia. And lastly, I would say most people with insomnia are surprisingly not that sleepy during the day. They may be tired, they may feel exhausted or washed out, but they generally don't fall asleep accidentally. Whereas if you are falling asleep at the wheel or in front of a movie or, or really feel like you need to take a nap, that might be something else.
Well, pretty sure I have insomnia.
I'm sorry to hear that, but it is very treatable.
Is there such a thing as getting, so you sleep throughout the night, but can you have poor sleep quality?
Absolutely. There are plenty of people who sleep 8 or more hours and they feel like I'm checking the boxes, I should be doing okay, but still the sleep quality is not good. And usually that happens when someone has sleep apnea. That's where you stop breathing periodically when you sleep because your airway closes at some place. And for someone with a moderate level of sleep apnea, for example, every 4 minutes while they're sleeping, they're stopping breathing for at least 10 seconds at a time, sometimes much longer than that. So yeah, if you think of it that way, that's kind of scary, but also completely understandable that they wouldn't feel very good the next day, right? So sleep apnea is a common culprit for poor quality sleep. And similarly, there's not only stoppage of breathing that can interrupt your sleep, there can also be too much noise or too much light. Some people are sharing rooms with other people and their sleep may be disturbed by other people, pets. But I would say, those are not necessarily deal breakers in and of themselves, but too many of those factors added together could certainly be detrimental to sleep quality.
Well, Jacqueline, you have the pets.
I do horrible habits. I mean, we don't usually let the pets sleep in the bed, but we have the last few nights and my sleep's not been great. I've noticed, I kind of asked about quality because I used to have more insomnia. Like I could always fall asleep early, but I would always wake up at like 3 a.m. and be awake for 2 hours. And that would drive me bananas. So then I went on trazodone, and trazodone allows me to fall back asleep. But like my boyfriend Paul is just driven crazy. I mean, he needs to sleep like 10 hours now because I'm just flipping around beside him, like,
Gotcha.
Destroying his sleep. My sleep sucks. I have crazy vivid nightmares every night. Lots
Jacqueline.
It's okay. The nightmares thing would be sad, but they're so cool that, she's talking about spending like 30 years of your life asleep. And I'm like, well, I'm not really asleep when I'm sleeping. I'm having crazy adventures.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're just like watching an action movie.
Yeah, and I'm shifting characters.
Wow,
so
interesting.
Yeah, I want to talk about dreams at some point.
Yeah, we can talk about it now if you'd like. That is really fascinating. Dreams, including nightmares, happen during REM sleep, and REM is one of what people usually call stages of sleep, but really I like to think of them as types of sleep because it's not like you're in a video game and you have to go up levels or something like that. They're just different types of sleep. Your brain samples them, in somewhat of a predictable pattern throughout the night, kind of like going up to a buffet and trying different things. And so REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement sleep, is one of those types of sleep. And you tend to have them in the second half of the night in a few bouts. And they get kind of more long and intense the closer you get to the morning. And that's most of where our dreaming happens. So dreaming is interesting because we're not really sure why it happens. There are lots of theories like, emotion regulation, potentially memory consolidation, just bits and pieces of memories and things, in our brain that's being jumbled together, being sorted out, and they're just kind of being smushed together into these vivid images. But what we do know is that dreaming is actually a learned behavior. So it's not just something that happens to us. It's not like we're just passive and dreams come to us and we just have to take it. Dreaming is actually a lot more active than most people think. So you can think of it like this. If you're driving a car down like a barely there country road, it's really just like two ruts, in the grass. Mm-hmm. The more you drive your tires over those two ruts, the deeper they get and the more you're going to drive over the same ruts next time you go that way, right? So it's like every time you have a nightmare, you're driving over those same ruts. You're teaching your brain to go in that direction. And so what we can do is actually teach ourselves to have different content in our dreams. So this is called imagery rehearsal therapy, or IRT for short. And it's actually a lot simpler than you would think. You really just, during the day, rehearse a different type of dream. Like maybe take a recurring dream or a recurring theme or something like that, change one detail about it that you like, or change two details, whatever you want, or just give yourself a magic wand so that whatever your nightmare is, you can just freeze the scene or you can make a portal and jump out of it. And the more you vividly rehearse that in your mind during the day, the more likely you are to dream that at night. And so then you kind of get on a positive cycle where the more you carve out new roads on that grass, the more likely your car will drive over those ruts instead of the other ones you had carved for years and years. And this works remarkably well for some people. So just throwing that out there.
That's so cool.
Right?
And when you would say rehearse, is it you're writing it out or thinking it or imagining it or all of those? Okay.
All of those. Yeah. You can write it down. You can read it out loud to yourself. You can close your eyes and visually imagine things. I think that's probably the most potent since dreams are so visual. And similarly, I'm sure you've heard of lucid dreaming, which just means when a dreamer is aware that they're dreaming and maybe can even control some aspects of the dream in real time. And lucid dreaming is a real thing. This is actually not like a woo-woo, new age, whatever. It's actually a scientifically well-established phenomenon. And we actually have brain imaging studies showing that experimenters can communicate with a lucid dreamer in real time. A study just came out earlier this year where the dreamer was told to use eye blinks to communicate with Morse code. So they would play sounds on a speaker asking like, what's 4 + 2? And in the dream, they would hear that come from the sky and they would write back 6 with their eye blinks. I know, isn't that crazy?
It's so cool.
We know this is a real phenomenon. It's a real thing. And plenty of people across different cultures and historically have practiced lucid dreaming, some in very spiritual contexts, some just for fun. But there is some evidence that when you practice lucid dreaming, it can help the quality of your dreams. They can, decrease nightmares, increase the positive emotion associated with dreams. And there is some concern that maybe if you do it too much, it might affect your overall sleep quality, but there's no real hardcore evidence showing that. So, if you're interested, you could look into that as a fun experiment.
Yeah, so Paul is like a very reliable lucid dreamer. Like when he wants to lucid dream, he'll lucid dream. And it was kind of cool because in the beginning of our relationship, I went to England for a month and he really missed me. So he would just lucid dream me.
Aw, that's sweet.
His face is like,
wow.
Oh my God.
This is so cool. It's blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Do you think this has any like mental health implications? I know that, dreaming, having nightmares can be involved in like PTSD and trauma and other kinds of anxiety. Like if you improve we'll get back to sleep in a minute, but if you can improve your dreams, does it actually improve like your mental health or positive affect during the day? Or
yeah, it sure does. So there are actually studies showing that just treating nightmares alone in people with PTSD and nightmares can improve nightmares and also improve PTSD a little bit and depression a little bit. And as you well know, sometimes people are reluctant to engage in trauma-focused therapy, or they don't have access to it, or it's just too much of a time commitment, or they don't have the resources, right? Because it is a pretty involved treatment to do evidence-based trauma-based therapy, trauma-focused therapy. But if we can give someone 2 sessions of IRT, imagery rehearsal therapy, and improve their nightmares, then that raises the water for all boats too. Their sleep quality will improve, their mood can improve, they can be more amenable to more mental health treatment from the initial success of decreasing their nightmares. So that's certainly something they do a lot at the VA, actually.
Can you treat phobias with lucid dreaming, like almost, systematic desensitization? Suddenly you're holding a snake in your dream, or you're giving a speech in front of 400 people, anything like that?
That is a fabulous question, and I do not know the answer to that. I don't know if that's ever been tested, but I imagine that someone would have to master lucid dreaming pretty well before trying that.
Doing exposures in your sleep.
That's a fascinating idea. I really like that. I don't think anyone has ever tried it, because usually people are trying to get away from the snakes and the public speaking in their dreams. But hey, if we can do that totally risk-free, not in real life, maybe that's like a virtual reality treatment almost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with lucid dreaming, there's like lore around it. Like, what if, in lucid dreaming, you can kind of control your surroundings. So, like, what if you enjoy your dreams more than you enjoy waking life? Like, does that ever happen? Do you ever have, like, a girlfriend in your dreams that you don't actually have in real life? And so it's almost like the Second Life problem. That live echo, that video game problem, where people get sucked so into that, they, like, lose the rest of their life.
Reality almost. Yeah. This reminds me of the movie Inception, which in it there are people who go specifically to sleep and to dream in this like black market dreaming room, right? So I don't know about that. I feel like lucid dreaming is maybe not so potent that you could really fully live out a life there. However, one of the first researchers to really systematically document lucid dreaming and his own experiences with it, he got really into it. He lucid dreamed every night for 3 years, and he documented all of it and wrote a paper about it. And by the end, he was lucid dreaming like 3 times a night. So I don't know, that seems a little bit excessive to me, but I feel like most people couldn't get to that level even if they tried.
What's his name? What's the name of this person?
Oh, shoot. What was his name? I can look that up for you, and you can put it in the show notes. It's definitely a fascinating paper. Yeah.
That's great. Tell us a little bit more about other sleep issues. You mentioned insomnia, which is sleep apnea. What are other ones that tend to come into your door?
Yeah, so one that is one of my favorites to treat, because most people don't realize this exists, is circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. Yeah, so circadian rhythms are basically our internal biological clocks. We can think of our bodies as, we basically have billions of clocks in us. All of our organ systems have clocks. Most of our cells have their own clocks. So our bodies are just made up of billions of clocks with one central clock in our brain. So it's almost like a really busy train station where, all the trains have their own clocks, and they have to line up and not crash into each other and run on schedule, and the conductors and the passengers all have their own watches that they're looking at. So for that whole system to run smoothly, the central clock that's on the big clock tower has to be pretty reliable, right? Because everyone's setting their clock to that one. So everything runs smoothly if that central clock runs on time, it's consistent, it's reliable. But when it suddenly speeds up or slows down or gets reset at odd times, then trains start crashing into each other and people start missing their train. So what happens is sometimes we can have things like jet lag, or we wake up at 6 a.m. on weekdays to go to work, but we sleep in until 9 a.m. on weekends. That's called social jet lag. That's like flying yourself from North Carolina to California and back every week. You're jet lagging yourself. There are people though who are also born just biologically wired as super, super early morning people or super, super, super late night owls. And we all are on the spectrum of either having a conventional chronotype, which just means you're born like pretty average in terms of when you feel sleepy and when you want to wake up, or you can be a night owl or a morning lark. And how much your chronotype matches society's rhythms and what your job or school requires, that matters a lot. Because an extreme night owl living in a morning person's world suffers a lot. Can you relate to this? Yeah, I'm a night owl too. And in college, I never took a class before 10 a.m. And I did great in college. But then, in the real world, we can't really do that. And it's been really tough,
Yeah.
So then you end up with weekday, weekend discrepancies. You end up with just, feeling totally groggy and not ready to wake up in the morning. You hit the snooze button 7 times. So timing of sleep matters just as much as amount and quality of sleep. Because you can sleep the exact same 8 hours good quality sleep, but shifted by 2 hours, and that'll be very different than if you're sleeping on the schedule that your body wants to.
Yeah, what sucks about being a night owl is that it's almost as if, maybe because of its associations with like college age, going to bed at 2 a.m., partying, waking up at 11, it can make me feel irresponsible or lazy or something to move my schedule around that. But like, I try not to schedule anything before 10, ideally before 11, but I don't know how long I can keep that up. And there's always like a guilt associated with it. Like,
yeah. There's definitely a stigma. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that's one of the factoids that kind of blew my mind, that this is, your temperament. You're kind of born a morning lark or a night owl. I think people who are night owls and are kind of off of society, like, feel a lot of shame and guilt for it. Like, oh, if I just learned to like wake up earlier, I'm on a bad sleep schedule, but I prefer, it's kind of relieving for people to hear that this is just part of their makeup.
Absolutely. This is very biologically hardwired, and so much so that it's actually a little bit hard to change. You can't just change your habits and, be more motivated and suddenly you're a morning person. That's not how that works. I mean, there are ways to shift your clock. One really cool study out of Colorado a number of years ago took morning people and night owls camping, because it's Colorado, and they profiled them based on their melatonin curves. So they're like biologically measured, determined, morning people versus night owls. So when they went camping, they were under the sun all day. They didn't have electronics at night. So their clocks were just set by sunlight. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the week, everybody was biologically a morning person. So, it's hard for us to really mimic that in our real life, because we can't really go without electronics at night. We can't really be under the sun all day, for most of us anyway. But it is doable. So getting a lot of light during the day, especially first thing in the morning, that helps. Keeping a very consistent wake-up schedule, weekday and weekend, very much helps. And one trick that I really like as a night owl is I still get up early, same time every day. I mean, I have to anyway, because I have a 1-year-old and he wakes me up.
I was about to ask what it's like to be a night owl and have a baby.
Oh my God, it's so hard. It's a lot easier now because I'm a year and a half into it. But in the beginning, oh boy, it was really, really, really tough. But I have shifted over as best as I can, pretty much. But I take naps. So, night owls will not necessarily just feel sleepy earlier at night and be able to go to bed earlier if they wake up early in the morning, because it's not just how much sleep you've gotten that determines when you feel sleepy. It's your biological time. Mm-hmm. It's what your clock is saying, So at night, I'm still like an 11 o'clock sleeper. I can't go to bed earlier than that, or else I'll have insomnia. I'll just toss and turn. And that's another thing. Night owls often think they have insomnia, but really all they need to do is just go to bed later and they don't have insomnia anymore. And just sleep in later in the morning, and then they're perfect. So that's a common misconception. But yeah, so my nighttime sleep is curtailed because I can't fall asleep any earlier than 11 anyway. So I make up for it with a nap during the day, and that's pretty awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
For people who, so all these different kinds of disorders, there's a lot of sleep hygiene tips and stuff like that. And which ones are real and which ones are not? Like if people listening, like, oh, I have that. How can I improve my sleep?
Sure.
There's treatment, which we'll talk about later. But what about the just general lifestyle choices?
Sure. Sleep hygiene. I think the general sleep hygiene list is a double-edged sword. It's mostly good. It's like dental hygiene. Like, yes, brushing, flossing, great. But if you already have a cavity, brushing more is not going to get rid of that cavity. So if you already have insomnia, or if you already have sleep apnea, or you have some other sleep disorder, like bona fide sleep disorder, sleep hygiene is not going to do anything for you. In fact, a lot of my insomnia patients work really hard at sleep hygiene, and it ends up backfiring because they're working too hard. It's like they are putting too much effort into trying to manage their sleep through sleep hygiene, and that ends up putting more pressure on their sleep. And sleep is like a shy friend. She wants to hang out with you, but not if you're like on top of her all the time. So yeah, working too hard on sleep hygiene backfires. And so I almost want to minimize sleep hygiene especially when I talk to insomnia patients. Now, what sleep hygiene is good for is like people who don't take sleep seriously. Like maybe someone who's 23 and just really excited about all the things that life has to offer, and is also playing video games and on their phone all the time late into the night, and they don't think sleep is important, and they're kind of like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Mm-hmm. Maybe then sleep hygiene would be a good set of habits to get into. But otherwise, I would say it's certainly not going to cure any sleep disorders.
What are are there any sleep myths people come in with, and they're like, I heard this supplement helps, or
I hear that one a lot. Insert blank supplement. And CBD also. I mean, I don't know enough about the latest research on CBD to say one way or the other, so I'll leave that one alone. But again, if you already have a sleep disorder, including insomnia, a supplement is not gonna move the needle, because like we mentioned earlier, the perpetuating factors of insomnia are the ways that you act around sleep, the ways you think about sleep, your crappy relationship with sleep. Those are the logs you add onto the fire. So adding, magnesium or valerian to the mix, I mean, that's like a drop in the bucket. Even if that was helpful for sleep, it's not going to get rid of those unhelpful behaviors and unhelpful thoughts. So supplements, not going to cure insomnia. And other sleep myths, I think two biggest ones I hear are, I really should be sleeping 8 hours. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't need to sleep 8 hours, especially older people. Sleep changes over the lifetime, and some of us are born needing more or less sleep. Like imagine if our, early human ancestors all perfectly exactly needed 8 hours of sleep at the exact same time. They all dropped dead for 8 hours. I mean, would our species still be alive? Like that's the most reliable meal for saber-tooth tiger ever, right? So we're all different with our sleep, in terms of timing, how much, the shape of our sleep, whether we wake up in the middle of the night, stay awake for a while. Like Jacqueline, you mentioned that you used to just wake up at 3 a.m. and be awake for a couple hours. That's actually a pretty normal pattern historically. Like in historical times before industrialization, before electronics, people used to just get up for a couple hours in during those witching hours and tell stories, do chores, make love, visit their neighbors. Like that was a regular part of life. And so they had their first sleep and then their second sleep. with an hour or two in between. And that's because, biologically, we spend the first half of our major sleep period doing the non-REM, like stage 1, 2, 3. And then we spend most of our time in the second half doing REM sleep. So it's almost like two different, qualitatively different segments of sleep. It's like a relay race. And sometimes, sleep 1 drops the baton before sleep 2 picks it up, and that's actually okay. It doesn't mean that your overall sleep health is any worse, as long as you're okay with it and you're not being too hard on yourself, beating yourself up, getting angsty about it. I mean, that's going to be stressful. But if you were just like, I'm going to have some extra me time, that would be perfectly fine.
So you might recommend actually getting up and just enjoying the next hour or two and then going back to sleep.
Exactly. Okay. Because if you're going to be awake anyway, you might as well enjoy it and not be teaching yourself that sleep is a struggle, that your bed is a place to be angsty. So if you're going to be awake, enjoying yourself somewhere other than the bed.
Yeah, it sounds, I could hear what you're talking about before with changing your relationship to sleep. Tell us a little bit more about the treatments, the
I didn't
CBTI.
even know there was CBT for sleep.
CBT for sleep is awesome. CBT for insomnia, or CBTI, I've heard it called the crown jewel of the CBTs because it checks all the boxes. It's brief, it's super efficacious and effective, and it's long lasting. Like one of the top people in our field, she did a study where she used CBTI to treat people with comorbid insomnia and depression. And 2 years after the trial, she wanted to look at, who maintained their gains, who didn't, and for the people who didn't maintain their gains, why. She couldn't even do that analysis because only 2 people out of like 200 in the trial didn't maintain their gains. So it's such an efficacious treatment, with a caveat that the vast majority of the studies have been done on relatively well-to-do, middle or upper class white people in Western countries. That's the major caveat. So we don't really know if it works for everybody, but for the people that we've tested it on, it works really well. So awesome. that's CBTI, and it's usually between 4 and 8 sessions. It really, I liken it to doing physical therapy. It's very hands-on. It's very data-driven. It's very iterative. Like from session to session, we look at your most recent week of sleep diaries to look at what your sleep looks like now, to finesse and to trial and error. So it's a very hands-on kind of treatment, and it does actually reset your sleep physiology. It changes your relationship with sleep, and it gives you tools for understanding your sleep, like really the mechanics under the hood, so that you can be your own sleep therapist in the future.
For loved ones of people who are struggling with insomnia, sleep apnea, any of these disorders that you are talking about, is there like a social component? Is there something that loved ones can do to help, or is it just kind of like, because I'm sure there's just either sleeping next to someone or seeing someone suffer from insomnia, you want to help, and there's, we might say like, oh, just stop eating before 6 p.m., right? We might have these like lay pieces of advice, but is there anything that people can do to support a person in their disorders?
I wish more people asked that question, because sleep is such a social thing. It's a lot more social than I think we give it credit for. And there are so many good answers to that. I think I would just start with saying one of the biggest favors you can do for your loved one, especially if it's a bed partner of yours, is to catch their sleep apnea early on, as early as possible, because people go through life not realizing that they have sleep apnea. And that's years and decades of damage to their heart and their brain. And because, you're not breathing for big chunks of time during the night, and you're constantly being woken up by needing to breathe, and you don't remember most of these awakenings, but they are happening, and they're preventing people from getting into deep sleep at all. And it's a very, very serious disease. And if we could prevent even like a portion of people with sleep apnea from having to have it for decades, we would go a long way in improving public health. So if your partner snores like a freight train or ever gasps for air or sounds like they've stopped breathing or make funny noises, or they wake up with a headache and dry mouth, they're sleepy during the day, and this is especially common for men over 50, but I've also seen younger women who are slim also have sleep apnea. And in fact, it's vastly underdiagnosed in women because, as with all medicine, a lot of our knowledge is based on research in men. So it's twice as common in men than in women, but it's 3 times as underdiagnosed in women. So, if at all in doubt, ask your doctor about sleep apnea or drag your partner in to see their doctor about sleep apnea. That's the best thing you can do for your partner. If your partner has insomnia, I feel like often what I see is partners being very supportive and accommodating in a way that actually backfires. They'll do things like, oh, I'll like tiptoe around you. I'll not make a single shred of noise. Like, oh my gosh, your sleep is bad. Like, let me put you to bed super early. Like, tell me what I can do to, help you sleep better. But then what that's reinforcing is just this unhelpful idea that sleep is fragile, that they need, that they're almost like a sleep invalid and they need to really tiptoe around their sleep. Whereas actually sleep is very resilient. If you're actually sleepy, a train might not wake you up. Like like I fell asleep watching a TV show last night. And it was like a very exciting climax of, one of my favorite shows, but I was really sleepy. So, if you're truly sleepy, you don't need to tiptoe around sleep. If you're tiptoeing, that means you're not sleepy enough yet. Just go ahead and enjoy life until you are sleepy. So partners, loved ones should really just not make such a big deal of sleep and remind them to live their life, not let them cancel social activities because of sleep, not let them nap too much during the day, not let them just like hole up miserable under a blanket because they didn't sleep well. Get them out under the sun. Like, let's get social and active. That's actually the best thing for their sleep. And it's not, the best thing you can do is just get them to live their normal life as if they didn't have insomnia. And ironically, that will help them not have insomnia.
That's crazy. That goes so well in line with all the other kinds of tips for loved ones. It's like, don't let them avoid their life and the things that they care about and their normal activities because of this disorder, this illness. Like, encourage them to re-engage, which for people who are, who are struggling with sleep, I imagine it's so easy to do the opposite. Like, oh, just let them rest.
Yes,
right? Like,
exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's accommodation behaviors, just like in OCD and anxiety disorders, in depression even. But, exercise and activation and socializing, those are the panaceas that work for all mental illness, right? And it's the same thing for sleep.
What do you think about meds? Is there ever a time when you think that meds are advisable, or does CBTI work better?
Sure. Yeah. So meds are designed for short-term use during an acute bout of insomnia.
Wow.
This is where, if someone is going through a divorce and they have the IRS is auditing them and, whatever, like just a lot of stress is going on in their life. They need to just bulldoze through this next 3 weeks, 2 months at most. And a sleep med might just help them get through that. No sleep medication is really FDA approved or designed for long-term chronic use, especially the off-label ones like the Xanax and the Klonopin, and the ones that are really meant for something else like panic disorder, that are not meant for sleep, that are used off-label for sleep. They're really, the benzodiazepines really not meant to be used long-term. So, I tell people to not beat themselves up for using sleep medication if they're just having external stressors in their lives right now that they need to get through. But to go see someone about a behavioral sleep consult, before they try to come off their sleep medication, because sometimes coming off the wrong way can actually backfire and give you the wrong idea. Because if you've been taking any sleep med for any amount of time, like a couple months, let's say, you're going to have rebound insomnia when you stop. Like, that's just a physiological withdrawal effect. But then people interpret that as, oh crap, it looks like I can't sleep without this medication. And then there's a psychological component. Or they try to tough it out for 3-4 nights and they're not sleeping at all. They're like, screw it, I need to just take my whatever. And then they take it for one night, they fall asleep, they feel so relieved, and that's reinforcing. And now they're really psychologically hooked on this medication. But what's really happening is they didn't sleep for 3 days. Of course they're going to be sleepy. They were going to fall asleep anyways. But now the medication gets the credit instead of their own biology. So between all of those psychological factors and just the desperation people have for sleep medications are actually very psychologically addicting. But you can actually very successfully taper off those medications with guidance, with some CBTI already under your belt. I've done it successfully with plenty of people. I got this one guy off of like 5 different medications and over-the-counter things. He thought it was going to take like a year and $10,000. He was like, all right, I have dedicated the next year and $10,000 to getting this done. I'm like, we don't need to do that. It's okay. Let's try 3 or 4 sessions, which will be like a few $100s. We'll see how that goes. Wow. And then he was done after that. And he was able to take his $9,000 whatever dollars to go to Europe. So it's very doable. I cannot emphasize this enough that sleep disorders are super treatable if you are talking to the right providers.
So with all these different treatment options with CBTI and things like that, can you kind of direct people to resources? Like, how can they find a provider? Are there books or reading materials that people can dig into more?
I will gladly send you a list that your listeners can find in the show notes.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, you guys. This was so much fun.
This was great.
awesome.
Learned so much. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
You're so welcome.
It's a really hopeful episode, too. I had no idea that there was so much hope when it came to this.
So much hope. Always.
Maybe I can get off my trazodone. All right. Well, I'm positive that everybody loved this episode. So thank you so much, Jade. And we will see you all next week. And don't sleep on giving us ratings, reviews, and subscribing. My new thing is coming up with a catchy way to beg people to rate, review, and subscribe us.
Great pun. I love it.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.